There is a financial principle so counterintuitive that most wealth builders dismiss it the moment they hear it. It was spoken 3,000 years ago by the wealthiest king in human history. Yet today, it remains hidden in plain sight. King Solomon called it the principle of scattering. Modern investors call it irrational. But what if the very act of holding tight is the reason your wealth refuses to grow? What if the master key to financial increase has always been the exact opposite of what you have been taught? This is not about charity. This is about the invisible architecture of prosperity itself. Stay with me, because what you are about to discover will challenge everything you believe about building wealth. King Solomon was not a philosopher who theorized about money from a distance. He was the wealthiest monarch of the ancient world, a man who received 666 talents of gold annually, not including revenue from merchants, traders, and vassal kings. His wealth was so extraordinary that silver was considered common during his reign, as worthless as stones in Jerusalem. The shields in his palace were hammered from pure gold, each one containing over 7 pounds of the precious metal. He built a throne of ivory, overlaid with the finest gold, with no equal in any kingdom. Yet Solomon did not write about wealth from the perspective of accumulation. He wrote from the perspective of stewardship. And that distinction changes everything. The modern wealth trap begins with a simple but devastating error. We believe that wealth is something we own. We treat our income, our investments, our assets as personal possessions to be guarded, protected, and multiplied through careful control. The entire financial industry is built on this assumption. Risk management, portfolio protection, wealth preservation, defensive strategies. Every system is designed around one core belief: hold tight or lose it all. But Solomon looked at wealth through an entirely different lens. He understood that wealth is not a possession, it is a stewardship. And the moment you confuse the two, you enter a paradox that guarantees your poverty. True stewardship begins with a foundational truth that feels like surrender to the modern mind. Everything you have is not yours. Your income is not the result of your effort alone. Your opportunities are not self-created. Your abilities are not self-generated. Ancient wisdom says that wealth and honor come from the provider, that the source is the ruler of all things, and that in the hand of the provider is power and might to make great and to give strength to all. This is not religious language meant to make you feel small. This is the philosophical foundation of prosperity itself, because once you recognize that you are not the owner but the manager, everything changes. Your relationship with money shifts from fear-based control to flow-based responsibility. Stewardship is the acknowledgement that you have been entrusted with resources for a purpose beyond yourself. It is not about giving away everything you have. It is about understanding that accumulation without purpose creates stagnation, and stagnation eventually collapses into loss. Solomon observed this pattern across every domain of life. The farmer who hoards seed instead of planting it will starve by spring. The merchant who stores goods instead of trading them will watch them rot. The king who stockpiles gold instead of investing it in his people will watch his kingdom crumble. The principle is universal. What you refuse to release, you eventually lose. Not because the universe punishes greed, but because wealth by its very nature is designed to flow. And when you dam the flow, the water stops reaching you. This is where the paradox begins. The modern mind cannot accept that scattering leads to increase. Every instinct screams the opposite. Save more, spend less, protect what you have, cut costs, minimize risk, hold tight. These are not wrong principles in themselves. But when they become the foundation of your wealth philosophy, they create a cage. Because the invisible architecture of prosperity is not built on control. It is built on circulation. And the moment you understand this, you unlock the master key that Solomon spent a lifetime teaching. Solomon captured this truth in one of the most powerful verses ever written about money. Proverbs chapter 11 verse 24 says this: "One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty." Read that again slowly, because it directly contradicts the logic of scarcity. One person scatters. The Hebrew word used here means to spread, to disperse, to distribute widely without holding back, and the result is not loss. It is increase. Yet another person withholds more than is appropriate, clinging to what they believe is theirs, and the result is not security. It is poverty. The verse does not say the generous person might prosper. It says they will. And it does not say the hoarder might struggle. It says they will come to poverty. Let us go deeper into the original language, because the richness of this principle is hidden in the words themselves. The phrase gives freely in Hebrew carries the connotation of sowing seed. It is not reckless spending. It is strategic planting. The farmer does not throw seed randomly into the wind and hope for the best. He scatters it intentionally in prepared soil at the right season with the expectation of a harvest. The act of scattering is not loss. It is investment. But it requires faith in the process. It requires trust that the ground will yield more than what was planted. And it requires the willingness to let go of what is in your hand today in order to receive what could be in your hand tomorrow. Now consider the second half of the verse, the one who withholds. The Hebrew word here means to hold back, to restrain, to keep for oneself what should be given. Notice the phrase more than is meet or more than is appropriate. This is not talking about wise saving or prudent planning. This is talking about excessive holding, the refusal to release even when release is the right action. And the outcome is chilling. It tends to poverty. The word tends means it moves inevitably in that direction, like water flowing downhill. Hoarding does not create security. It creates the conditions for loss. Why does this happen? Because wealth is not a static object. It is energy in motion. When you receive income, you are receiving a flow. That flow came to you from somewhere, and it is meant to continue moving through you to somewhere else. Your role as a steward is to direct that flow wisely, not to stop it. The moment you dam the flow out of fear, you also dam the flow in. This is not mysticism. This is observable pattern. The business that reinvests profits grows. The business that hoards profits stagnates. The individual who circulates resources creates opportunities. The individual who buries resources creates isolation. The principle of scattering is not generosity for generosity's sake. It is the recognition that increase comes from circulation, not accumulation. Ancient agricultural societies understood this instinctively. In Israel, the law commanded farmers to leave the edges of their fields unharvested so the poor could glean. This was not charity. This was economic design. Because when you leave the edges, you signal trust in the provider. You acknowledge that your harvest does not depend solely on maximizing every square inch of land. It depends on alignment with the flow of provision. And that alignment creates a return that goes far beyond what you could engineer through control alone. The Apostle Paul echoed this principle centuries later when he wrote, "Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully." The harvest matches the seed, not because you earn it, but because you participate in the system correctly. So the first parable is this: scattering is not loss. It is the mechanism of increase. And withholding is not safety. It is the pathway to poverty. The master key begins to turn when you stop asking how much you can keep and start asking how much you can release. Now we must go deeper, because the paradox becomes even more profound. Why does hoarding lead to poverty? On the surface, it seems impossible. If I keep everything I earn, should I not have more than someone who gives away a portion? The mathematics seem obvious. But Solomon is not talking about mathematics. He is talking about systems. And in the system of wealth, hoarding creates three invisible forms of decay. The first decay is spiritual. When you hoard, you transfer your trust from the provider to the possession. Your sense of security stops coming from alignment with the flow and starts coming from the size of your account. This is a subtle but catastrophic shift, because the moment your peace depends on your balance, you become enslaved to it. You cannot take risks. You cannot seize opportunities. You cannot invest in growth. Every decision is filtered through fear of loss. And fear-based decision-making always leads to contraction, never expansion. You begin to worship the gold instead of honoring the source. And when that happens, the gold becomes your master, not your tool. The second decay is relational. Hoarding isolates you. Generosity connects you. When you circulate resources, you build relationships. You create goodwill. You open doors. You become known as someone who can be trusted with influence because you use influence to bless others. But when you withhold, you signal distrust. People stop bringing opportunities to you because they sense you will not share the reward. Networks close. Doors lock. You may have wealth in your account, but you have poverty in your access. And access is the true currency of sustained prosperity. The third decay is systemic. Wealth that does not move begins to corrupt. This is true financially, socially, and spiritually. Money that sits stagnant loses purchasing power to inflation. Resources that are not invested decay in value. Opportunities that are not seized evaporate. Solomon observed that excessive holding leads not just to stagnation, but to active loss. Because the universe rewards flow and penalizes blockage, this is not karma. This is design. And fighting the design always costs more than flowing with it. Now listen to the second parable, which reveals the positive side of the paradox. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 25 says, "A generous soul will prosper, and he who refreshes others will himself be refreshed." The phrase generous soul in Hebrew is literally the soul of blessing. It describes a person whose very identity is wrapped up in being a source of increase for others. Not a martyr, not a doormat, but someone who sees their wealth as a tool to create flourishing around them. And the promise is not small. The generous soul will be made fat. This is ancient language for abundance, for overflow, for more than enough. It is the picture of a harvest so large that the barns cannot contain it. But the second half of the verse is where the master key fully turns. He who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. The Hebrew word for waters means to give drink, to provide what is needed for life and growth. When you water others, you participate in their flourishing. You do not create the growth. The provider does, but you become the channel. And here is the mystery. The one who waters will also be watered, not by the people you water, by the source. The flow you release toward others creates a flow back toward you from a reservoir infinitely larger than any human could provide. This is not transactional. You do not give to person A and expect person A to give back. You give to person A, and the return comes from direction Z, often in a form you never expected, at a time you could not have predicted. This is why hoarding feels safe but leads to poverty, and scattering feels risky but leads to increase. Because hoarding keeps you locked in a closed system where you are the only source. But scattering connects you to an open system where the provider is the source and the provider's resources are infinite. The hoarder trusts in his own supply. The steward trusts in the flow. So the second parable is this: generosity is not depletion. It is the activation of a return system that operates beyond your ability to control or predict. And refreshing others positions you to be refreshed from sources you cannot see. So, how do we take this ancient principle and apply it to the world of modern investing, business, and wealth building? Because Solomon was not telling you to give away your rent money or ignore financial planning. He was revealing a framework that makes your planning more effective, not less. The principle of scattering becomes practical when you understand the difference between defensive wealth and offensive wealth. Defensive wealth is built entirely on protection. Save more. Cut expenses. Avoid risk. Build walls around what you have. There is a place for defense. Every wise steward maintains reserves. Every prudent person plans for uncertainty. But when defense becomes your only strategy, you cap your growth. You create a fortress, but fortresses do not expand. They only hold ground. And in a world that is constantly changing, holding ground is the same as losing ground. Defensive wealth can protect you from loss, but it cannot generate increase. Offensive wealth is built on strategic release. You maintain your foundation, but you actively look for opportunities to deploy resources into areas that will multiply. This is not reckless spending. This is intentional sowing. You invest in your own skills and education, knowing that increased capacity creates increased income. You invest in relationships and networks, knowing that access creates opportunities. You invest in businesses and ventures that align with your values, knowing that ownership creates equity. And yes, you invest in people and causes beyond yourself, knowing that generosity creates goodwill and positions you in the flow of return. The return on investment from kingdom giving is the most misunderstood concept in modern wealth building. People hear give and they think lose. But Solomon is teaching the opposite. When you give strategically, you are not losing capital. You are planting seed in soil you do not own, trusting that the harvest will come back to you multiplied. This is not a formula. It is a flow. And the flow responds to faith, not manipulation. Consider this framework. Every time you receive income, you are standing at an intersection. You can route that income into 3 directions: consumption, accumulation, or circulation. Consumption is using it for immediate needs and desires. Accumulation is storing it for future security. Circulation is deploying it into growth opportunities, including generosity. The hoarder sends everything to accumulation. The fool sends everything to consumption. The steward balances all 3, but always prioritizes circulation, because circulation is the only category that generates return. Here is the modern application. When you receive a bonus, a windfall, an unexpected increase, your first question should not be, how can I protect this? Your first question should be, where can I plant this? Maybe you plant it in your business by upgrading a tool that will increase your capacity. Maybe you plant it in your network by hosting a dinner that will deepen key relationships. Maybe you plant it in your community by funding a project that aligns with your mission. Maybe you plant it in your future by investing in an asset that will appreciate. The specific answer will vary, but the posture is always the same: release in order to receive. The practical tool is this: develop a giving ratio that reflects the principle of scattering. If 10% feels safe, start there. If 20% feels like a stretch, go there. The percentage is not the point. The posture is the point. You are training your heart to trust the flow instead of worshiping the balance. And every time you release, you are turning the master key a little further, unlocking a dimension of provision that control-based strategies can never access. We return now to the beginning. Solomon's master key is not complicated. It is simply counterintuitive. The wealth builders who ignore it are not foolish. They are simply operating from the wrong framework. They believe wealth is built by holding. Solomon teaches that wealth is built by releasing. They believe security comes from control. Solomon teaches that security comes from alignment with the flow. They believe generosity is a cost. Solomon teaches that generosity is the mechanism of return. This is not about becoming reckless. This is about becoming wise. The hoarder operates from fear. The fool operates from impulse. The steward operates from faith. And faith in this context is not blind optimism. It is trust in the principle that the universe rewards circulation and penalizes stagnation. It is trust that the provider who gave you the ability to earn wealth will continue to provide as long as you remain a faithful steward of the flow. The stewardship paradox is this: you increase what you scatter, and you lose what you hoard. Not because giving is magic, but because giving aligns you with the architecture of prosperity itself. You cannot game the system. You cannot manipulate the flow. But you can position yourself within it. And when you do, the results are undeniable. Your capacity expands. Your opportunities multiply. Your peace deepens. Not because you earned it through perfect performance, but because you aligned yourself with the way wealth actually works. So here is your activation step. Identify one area where you have been withholding out of fear. Maybe it is a business investment you have been avoiding because it feels risky. Maybe it is a relationship you have been neglecting because it requires time and energy. Maybe it is a cause you care about but have not supported because you are waiting for greater abundance. Take the step. Release the resource. Scatter the seed. Not recklessly, but intentionally. And watch what happens. Because the principle does not fail. It has been operating for 3,000 years, and it will continue operating long after you and I are gone. The master key is in your hand. The question is whether you will turn it. The modern wealth builders who ignore this principle will continue to struggle under the weight of their own control. But you do not have to. You can step into the flow. You can become a conduit instead of a container. You can experience the mystery that the generous soul will prosper, and the one who waters will also be watered. This is not theory. This is the lived wisdom of the wealthiest king in history, and it is available to you today. And maybe, just maybe, the wealth you have been chasing will stop running from you the moment you stop chasing it, and start stewarding it the way it was always meant to be stewarded. If this reflection resonated with you, follow the path of the Solomon Wealth Code, where ancient wisdom meets modern wealth building, and the journey toward true prosperity continues.